over 10 years on from my fortunate creation of the acronym BRIC, I still meet many people from Mexico that don't like to speak to me because it should have been called BRIMC. As you'll see in a few minutes, my thinking has evolved in a way that reduces the relevance of whether the M is in that acronym or not, I hope. Ambassadors, good morning to you both. As I was just chatting with them over coffee before we came in here, I actually believe somebody has been very clever in choosing this moment to focus on Mexico as a more important place for the UK and indeed for others, because as I will suggest in my comments, because of some things that are going on in some of the other growth markets, such as I call them, particularly China, but also to some extent Brazil, it seems to me Mexico should be on the radar of more investors around the world and people wanting to do business, perhaps, than would have been the case a decade or so ago when I did dream up the BRIC context. So what I'm going to do is show you a few pictures about how I see the world and the position of Mexico in it, and then hopefully leave some time, I'm not sure if the facilities allow for this, for some questions. I can't help, as a final introductory comment, in saying, as some of you perhaps know, I am slightly obsessed about a certain British football team, and if I would have known Chicharito would have appeared on the scene in the way that he did, there would have been definitely an M in BRIC. So, about 12 months ago now, in my new role as chairman of Goldman Sachs' asset management division, on meeting many conservative investors around the world, especially pension funds, to my surprise, and it's an ongoing surprise, many of them still think of so-called emerging markets as like some kind of disease. That it's something you may flirt with when everything else fails, but all you're going to get is a lot of risk and headaches. And whilst one can understand that to a small degree, particularly from a historical perspective, as I'll show you now, with the speed at which our world is evolving, frankly, it is really quite naive and probably not very sensible, and possibly, actually, in terms of the way the world is evolving, quite rude. The right-hand pie chart here, which for some strange reason is in the colours of the other team in Manchester, which doesn't really matter so much anymore, as it did a week ago. Those 8 countries, of which Mexico is one of them, in my judgment, are now so economically important to the world, and with it probably capable of their own destiny being determined by themselves, people should not think of them as a traditional emerging market type country. And I'll show you at the end of my brief comments in an asset allocation perspective, is how we are trying to encourage people to think about dealing with this changing world. If you take those 8 countries and put them into the left-hand pie chart of the world, you can see that the 8 of them have a weight of GDP around 23%. Actually, it's probably a bit higher than that. Now we're getting the details of where the world ended at 2011. Nearly double the combined weight of all the other more genuinely described emerging market nations, which number probably 140. If you look at the middle part of this picture where it lists the so-called N11, a phrase which I am frequently somewhat embarrassed about, because it is nothing more profound than a description to describe the 11 countries with the largest populations after the 4 BRIC nations. And rather intriguingly, 4 of them, including Mexico, warrant being in this growth market status, and the other 7 more traditional emerging markets. And you'll see, hopefully in a minute, as to why it is so obvious that people should be thinking about things a bit more along these lines, if not fully embracing it. Before I do that, let me just show you briefly what we're thinking about the current economic cycle. Here we are entering week 10, I think it is, of 2012, and fortunately, the mood about the state of the world is getting a bit better, and I think there is a fundamentally core, simple reason for that, which is, of course, highly relevant for Mexico too. Your frequently noisy northern neighbour, noisy neighbours being something as a Manchester United fan I like to talk about, but your very big northern neighbour seems to be finally emerging from the dramatic shock of 2008 in what seems to be a more self-sustaining manner. And Friday's employment data in that regard was a particularly good further signal in my judgment. And as you can see, we are expecting people to continue to be somewhat positively surprised about the momentum in the US. In addition, it seems to me that we are seeing pretty strong signs that China has finished with its days of 10% plus growth. But I would argue for this stage of China's evolution, that is actually a really good thing, and has become almost a deliberate desire of policy, as indicated by Premier Wen's comments last Monday that they expected growth this year to be 7.5%. That shouldn't, in my judgment, be anything of a surprise at all to people that watch China closely. It is now over a year ago in their 5-year plan where they actually targeted 7% growth for the next 5 years. China is moving to a phase of growth and development in which the quality of growth is now more important than its quantity. And as I'll come back to, it seems to me that is a particularly important thing for Mexico, not least because as part of it they are deliberately pursuing a policy of accelerating domestic wage increases, which means the days of China being the cheap factory for the world are not completely finished, but essentially coming to an end. In that regard, over the weekend, China reported a substantial trade deficit for February, which is not bad news, it's good news. Let me jump forward to this chart, because here I think you can get the rationale of this growth market concept, hopefully, more clearly. This shows you a series of columns and a picture of what we expect in terms of different contributions to global GDP growth this decade, in dollar terms. And you can see the highest bar is for the so-called growth 8, as I've defined them. And if you look closely, and hence why it seems to me we need to think about them differently, the dollar contribution from those 8 countries will be more than double that of the Euro area and the US put together. The economic health of the world this decade does not depend on Greece. I have become very fond of saying in the past few weeks that China creates the economic equivalent of another Greece every 11.5 weeks. So here we are in week 10, and they've created nearly another one. Apologies to those of you that are Greek or of Greek ancestry. It's a wonderfully beautiful place, but A, you have no chikorito, and B, economically, Greece is not that important. Second thing to point out is China itself will be responsible for about half of this, even with the lower growth